It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. That is a quote by Jiddu Krishnamurti. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Whole Being Podcast. I am Igho, your host, and today I want to talk about Plato's allegory of the cave and what it means to being the person to spark a revolution in a community or in a society or in a group. But essentially what it means to be a generational curse breaker, the person who is one of the first in a family to break a trend, and all the internal and external conflicts and sometimes misunderstandings that can come with that, what it means to forge your own path and to stay on it even when you don't necessarily have support from the people that you expected would support you. I am recording this on a Sunday and I feel so sick. I thought I had COVID, but I don't have COVID. I've taken a test. I don't have COVID, thank God. But I do feel sick. My entire body hurts and my throat hurts. But I just wanted to put that out there just in case I sound, unenthusiastic. I don't think I will sound unenthusiastic, but if you sense a little bit of lack of enthusiasm in my voice, it is not you, it is not the podcast, it is not even me, it is lethargy. I'm barely functioning as a person, so I'm just hoping to make it through this episode in one piece. But I am excited to talk about today's topic. So let's start with, what is Plato's allegory of the cave? So the allegory of the cave is a philosophical thought experiment. And what it essentially says, and I'm going to be paraphrasing, is imagine a group of people who were born prisoners, chained together inside an underground cave. They have things to sleep on, they have structures, they have traditions that have developed over time. And behind the prisoners that have been chained up, there's a fire. And between the prisoners and the fire, there are moving puppets and real objects being shown on a kind of raised walkway. But remember, these prisoners cannot see anything behind them. They've been chained and they are stuck looking in one direction. That direction is the wall of the caves. Their whole lives, that's all they've been seeing. That is what they call their entire life. They know nothing else. So every now and then, the shadows of the objects cast by the moving figures are all that they know to be real, all that they know, period. As they look at the wall before them, they believe that the shadows of the objects cast by the moving figures, reflected by the fire, they believe that those shadows are real things. They don't know that they are shadows of things. They believe that those are real things. Their visible world, the shadows that they see, is their whole world. To them, it's not a shadow of a dog, it is a dog. It is not a shadow of a tree, it is a tree. And they go on living in this delusion until one day, one of the prisoners finds an exit and leaves the cave. And when they get outside, at first they can't even see anything because the sun is so bright. But once their eyes start to adjust, they start seeing the truth. They start realizing the true form of the things that the shadows have been showing. But now they know that this is the real world. There's a much realer world out here, not the one that they've been shown in the cave. So they run back to the cave, and now they're not even comfortable in the cave anymore because it's so dark, and they're stumbling because the darkness is no longer familiar to them. The cave is no longer familiar to them. But the other prisoners that are still inside the cave see how uncomfortable they are in the cave, and they think that wherever that prisoner is coming from and whatever they must have seen must have made them stupid. So they believe that it is the outside world that is harmful. And the person who went outside, the prisoner who made it outside, tries to tell them the truth about the real world. He tries to tell them that they are in a cave and that what they've been seeing is not real, but they don't believe it. In fact, they think that person is crazy and that the truth is not worth seeking. They are okay with what they have always known. And in the allegory, they even go as far as to try to attack and almost kill the person who is trying to free them. And that's when the prisoner realizes that the people are unwilling to give up their ignorance and the comfort of the world that they know, and that they would defend it, some of them even to the death. So the point of the allegory is that it shows what happens to a person after they've become enlightened, and how conflicts arise, the conflicts of knowledge and belief between those that they once shared those same beliefs with. And that even though the people in the cave hold a false belief, objectively false belief, they would rather fight to keep it than risk exploring the unknown. I'll leave some links in the description of the podcast episode to extra reading materials or videos if you want to know more about this stuff. It's one of the ABCs of philosophical thought experiments. It's one of the oldest ones. So if you're interested, check that out. And if you really want to be entertained by this thought experiment, you should watch the show Silo. It's on Apple TV Plus. It is so good, and I haven't seen it to the end yet, so I don't know if it's fully exploring the allegory of the cave, but it's definitely a very well thought out TV show that puts this thought experiment to practice, but in fiction. But that is just by the way. Let's focus on the episode. So the first time I read this allegory, there were many things that came to mind. The first was, I thought it was really funny because first time I saw it in, I think it was a crash course video on ethics and philosophy. But what I found really funny was I was reading through the comment section, and every single person in the comment section thought they were the prisoner that escaped. Every single person saw themselves as the quote unquote enlightened one, the free thinker. And I don't know that that's possible, but every time I remember that fact, it's really funny to me. But again, it does make sense because over time, this thought experiment has been applied to so many different thoughts and perspectives. But specifically for me, in the past, I want to say 4 years, when I've been observing and talking to people my age, some slightly older, some slightly younger, but mostly people who are evolving or finding themselves on a journey that is so different from what we would call the norm or what is the norm of their background. Every time I talk to them and we have conversations about what it means to go against the grain, even when going against the grain is not even such a major thing. For some people, going against the grain has meant choosing a different educational background or a different vocation than what their parents wanted for them. For other people, it's choosing to not be married at a certain age or not to marry a certain person. For other people, it's just choosing to follow a dream, a passion, making certain changes to your body. But whatever it is, in having those conversations about what it's like to do something just for yourself, I always come back to this allegory because forging your own path can be lonely. And I find that even when it's not lonely, when you're fortunate enough to have people who are like-minded, like I have been on some level, I think I've been fortunate to not entirely feel alone, because even when the person on the other side of the table is not necessarily making the same life decisions as you, they understand what it means, what it takes to go against the norm. It is still a very hard decision to make, especially since it's not always one big decision for most people. It is a series of small decisions. And I say it's a series of small decisions, even though there are big decisions that have to be made. The first of which for me, I find, is moving out. Actually moving out of that environment is so key, and is the common thread that runs through everybody that I have spoken to that has made big decisions that their family and friends did not agree with. For some people, it means simply moving away from home, and for some people, it could be moving to an entirely different country. Example, me, I've done both. And I also want to add a caveat that it also doesn't mean that every single person that is going through this is entirely alienated from their family or doesn't have a somewhat close relationship with them still. It doesn't mean you've gone full no contact with your family or your initial caregivers. That's the case for some people, but that's not the case for everyone. Either way, these are very hard decisions, and I think sometimes the people who don't agree with the decisions that you make sometimes underestimate how hard those decisions are, because they come at you with such opposition and such full force that they're not taking into account the fact that forging your own path is scary in and of itself. Another thing that I also think about is grief and how much space we make for grief, because as a society, we're not really prepared or we're not taught to hold space for grief. And on some level, we all kind of know this because culturally we're taught that there's a way grief should look like, right? Even when a person passes or when you lose someone, or we know someone who has lost someone, we kind of think there's a way it should look and that there's a way to do it. And so sometimes we try to unintentionally rush people through their stage of grief just so they can get back to their normal self, and that way we can feel better, more comfortable being around them. So holding space for grief in general is hard enough, but holding space for the grief of self, a self that is still living, is an entirely different beast in and of itself. I think it is important to grieve the self that you were, even though you know that being that version of you would have made you miserable in the long run. But you sometimes also have to grieve the unconditionally loving relationships that you know or think you probably won't get from your friends and family, because they think that you choosing a different lifestyle, or choosing to present yourself in a different way, or choosing to live your life in a different way, is leaving a negative mark on who they expected you to be, on who they wanted you to turn out to be. When you start making changes that they're uncomfortable with, they react the way they do because it changes their reality. It changes their perception of you in their reality. That's what they disagree with. But babes, you have to hold space for all of it. I cried a bit when I was outlining this episode because I think I really understand, for those of us who look back at our family lines and see how wrong things were, or how wrong things have been, how unjust things have been, and then dare to want better or decide to not settle for less. I'm always inclined to want to, I don't know, in some way, spiritually or like metaphysically reach out to touch someone else who feels the way I feel, to just let them know that I see you. And, because for me, it helps me to know that I don't walk this path alone. When I see people in the comment sections of certain videos, or like see someone else expressing that they feel the weight of what it is to forge their own path, when it's so vastly different from what they've been taught, it helps to feel seen. It helps to know that you're not crazy, you're not alone in it. Because, like the prisoner that escaped the cave, choosing or wanting to live differently from what your community considers the norm is hard enough, but being the first or one of the first to wake up to the fact that the norm is unjust and that the norm is just plain wrong, or that it should simply be questioned, is rough. It's rough to be the first person or one of the first, especially when the people who suffered through the experiences that you're trying not to accept and still suffer fault you or condemn you for daring to forge a different path. It's even extra infuriating. It's extra maddening. It pisses me off when you're judged for your being, but at the same time they don't mind reaping the fruits of your labor. They don't mind reaping the fruits of your you-ness, right, of your bravery. And all of this, what we know as breaking generational curses, is very hard work. And I don't want you to underestimate how much work you're putting in, because for you it is just your normal day-to-day thing. It is very important that you don't belittle the amount of work that you're doing when you're breaking generational curses, and you look back and you see that you are forging an entirely different path that is so wildly different from what you have been taught to want, to believe, to accept. Every single day you're doing that work. And if you belittle it, you might find yourself in the trap of constantly wishing you were doing more, because you're not taking into account the amount of work that you're already putting in. And finding times of rest in between is just as important as the hard work that you're doing. It is a thankless job, and not to make it sound like we are unsung heroes or something like that, but damn it, we are unsung heroes. Breaking generational curses is not an easy feat, and you should treat it as such. And it can look very different from all of us, and some of us are even doing multiple at the same time, are breaking multiple generational curses at the same time. It can be you saying we deserve more than we're getting, and the older generations being like, no, you can't always be happy, and you can't always do what you want, and sometimes you just have to make the best of a bad situation. Sometimes it can simply be asking why or why not. And it'll have people looking at you like you're crazy. For some of us, the generational curse is avoidance, and you just come from a long line of people who just want to act like something didn't happen, right? They don't want to acknowledge it at all. And what you don't acknowledge never heals. So it just becomes this ongoing thing festering underneath like the entire foundation of the family. And I've heard some young people here in America say that even their very decision to move away to college to avoid toxic family situations was seen as them turning their backs away from their families. Choosing not to provide financial support for fully able-bodied extended family members is seen as you being wicked and demonized. Or even something specific to womanhood, like not losing sleep over being single or being child-free, when your family is constantly reminding you that at 24 they already had a husband and 3 kids. So it does look different for all of us. And I actually have a pretty good example of a story, something that just happened to me this month at the beginning of September. I recently got reconnected to an old family member who happens to be older, who I have very fond memories of. Really excited to see her, and we were trying to reconnect over the phone and trying to set up a time to meet and hang out and talk about me, her kids, my family, blah blah. And so she was laughing and saying, wow, it's so difficult to schedule something with me, but at the same time she's glad because I'm always traveling and I'm being free And she's happy for me because now is, of course, the best time to do it, because once I get married and once I have children, that will all be over. But while I'm traveling and quote unquote globetrotting, I don't know who she thinks I am, but I won't correct that. At the end of the day, what's important is I still have to get married, and because that is still the most important thing. And this person, through no fault of her own, is no longer married and had been through a tumultuous marriage with someone who had betrayed her to the highest degree and abandoned her with multiple children and responsibilities and put her in an extremely shitty situation. So when she was saying all this to me, I didn't even want to, like, it wasn't one of those conversations where, like, because me, it's not every conversation I'm going to pull out my Chimamanda feminist hat. Sometimes I just, just let them talk, because especially when you're talking about older people that are set in their ways, sometimes for me, it's not worth the conversation. I like to pick and choose my battles. But knowing everything that she has been through and her telling me all of this, all I could think was, how could you still hold this belief that has screwed you up in the worst way? After everything that you've been through, you still hold on to this belief that the best thing that I can do, the best thing that I will ever do with my life is find myself a husband. Not that there's anything inherently wrong, find yourself a husband. If that's what you want, go for it. I want that for you. But I'm like, wow, you really can't save everybody. Not that I'm out here trying to save anybody, but I was like, wow, like the conditioning, the teaching, the socialization, it runs so deep. And it got me thinking about all the people, mostly women in my life, who have given all of themselves. They've given their youth, they've given their labor, they've given their intelligence, they've given their imaginations in pursuit or for settlement in their lives, in the lives that they now have. And over the years, we've seen their plight, we've heard their stories, we've heard them. And I kind of always look at them with a mixture of admiration and pity, but also anger, right? Because they're still so faithful to this belief that just is so unjust to you. And I remember having one of those conversations with my mom one time, and I told her that, like, my very existence is revolutionary in our family. The fact that I can simply say no is revolutionary, because the one thing that I know in my family is I'll block you. Because I'll always put my peace first, because I believe that in doing so, I'm not just protecting myself, I am protecting those who reap the benefit of my quote unquote labor, right? But you have to realize it too. And I think we all have to realize that our very existence is a revolutionary act. And that act looks different for all of us. There's this quote that I saw by, I want to say Steffi Wagner. I don't know I'm pronouncing the name correctly, but it says, pain travels through families until someone is ready to feel it. And it was one of those things that I came across on, like, those Tumblr posts where, like, someone posts a quote and someone else replies with their thought to the quote. But yeah, someone had posted a quote by Steffi Wagner saying, pain travels through families until someone is ready to feel it. And sometimes it takes generations. And that, unfortunately or fortunately, is so true. As the commenter had pointed out, that pain demands to be felt. And somewhere along the line, a child will be born whose charge it will be to feel all of it. And I think the commenter or someone else had commented that those people, the person who is born to feel all of it, those are your priests, those are your priestesses, those are your healers in the family, those are your shamans. And sometimes you call them mental health patients and you label their powers as craziness and depression and anxiety and bipolar disorders and all sorts of things. But they are the ones who are born with the gift of feeling. And as we all know, you cannot heal the pain that you refuse to feel. And I love that quote so much because it also made me think that in the same way, liberation also walks through families until someone is brave enough to take it on. And if that is you, I want to say lucky you, but also I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But I want you to know that while it is very, very hard work, it also doesn't have to mean hard, sad moments. That is not the only thing that your existence has to boil down to. You also have to teach yourself to revel, to take joy and excitement in the perks of being free, of being liberated, right? In the small, personal, and large public ways. And there are so many different ways. Being the person who graduates from high school, from college, getting your master's, your PhD can be revolutionary for you. Or on the flip side, being the person who knows that that path is not for them and chooses to take a more artistic, a more creative, a less formally educated structure to their life can be revolutionary. For me, sitting in a foreign country, in a shop with a glass of wine or a cup of tea is revolutionary. liking your own body and all its parts when you come from the kind of background where it is normal to make self-deprecating jokes about your body, your physique, is revolutionary. Saying no and just keeping it at that is revolutionary. Dancing alone in your room with your headphones on, revolutionary. Dancing, period, is revolutionary. Being single but wanting a partner, but because you're not willing to settle for less, you are living joyfully in your life, is revolutionary, because most of us come from backgrounds where you have been told that if you're single and unmarried and that's something that you want, then you're supposed to live a life of discontent and hunger. And on that note, even you deciding that the life that you want is you being unmarried and child-free is also revolutionary. A very big one for me that I think was also my tipping point was wanting to know. I was born into the Christian faith. I was raised Christian, and at some point I chose it for myself, right? And right now I'm kind of somewhere between, like, I'm not sure I really identify as a Christian anymore, or if I'm more, I don't know, like an agnostic theist of some kind. I'm not sure, but I don't know yet, and there's a lot to unpack there. And let me just add, if you're listening to this right now and at this point you're feeling the uncontrollable need to comment or send me an email or a DM saying the Lord still loves me, or I just need to find a better church, or you hope I find my way back to him, blah blah blah, let me just tell you right now, I don't care. I advise that you keep that, and if it concerns you so much, take it to the Lord in prayer. He won't block you, but I will. Okay? But wanting to know and question things is something that for me was a revolutionary act, because I don't know if you know anything about growing up in the church, but questioning things is not really encouraged in the church. It is literally in one of like the first 3 chapters of the Bible, the whole not eating the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thing. But me, I've just always wanted to know, and it was the constant shutdown that was what really sparked the big decisions. Because as long as I've wanted to be on the earth, I did not understand, not knowing, but for that matter, not wanting to question or not wanting to know more about why you're told to believe the things that you believe. I'm like, I want to understand literature references. I want to lay in the grass in the summer and read. I want to read books from all around the world. I want to learn languages. I want to know about history. I want to know about philosophy, how it affects our everyday life. I want to learn why human beings, why we have evolved the way we have evolved, why we think the way we do. I want to learn how to play the piano, the guitar. I want to learn poems written by different authors, to hear all the different ways that we as human beings have tried to make sense of the things that we feel in this world. I want education to be accessible. I want to be able to teach the things that I learn. I want to fall in love every single day with my life, and it can be tough, especially when you grow up in an environment where, like, I don't even think my environment was really stifling to the point where I wasn't told I think to a certain extent I am like I think to a certain extent, it is considered admirable that I am the way that I am in my family. But for those who are older, I definitely have seen how, like, it went from admirable to being kind of frowned upon the older I've gotten, because the older you get, the more your childhood curiosity starts becoming more of a threat and less of a talent that they can take credit for in public, if that makes sense. Because now the things that I know, the things that I am living are actually causing me to make decisions and take paths that are not exactly what would have been chosen for me, what is preferred. But at the end of the day, you still have to live your life. You still have to forge your own path, even though it is different from what your community has deemed as normal or as acceptable. And if you feel like you are awake in a place where everybody else seems to be sleeping, don't be afraid to speak your truth. It may not be beneficial to the people that are in your circle, but the more you exist truly as yourself, the more you choose to be who you are, the more you will shine that light onto other people and make them think about their own existence. And you go through phases where you feel alienated and that no one really understands your experiences or your perspective, but you truly never know the kind of impact you can have on someone else's life just because of your own existence. And I'm not saying you have to martyr yourself and be the spokesperson for the enlightened, right? We're all still learning, we're all still growing. I'm just saying, you existing in your truth, you living as yourself, being who you are, can start the ripple effect that causes the awakening in someone else, and then they will go on, and someone else and someone else and so on and so forth. So don't lose hope. And regarding Plato's allegory of the cave, there's still usually a question that I see pop pop up all the time, which is, as we go about living, can we really be confident in what we think we know? Like, how do you know that what you know is the right thing to know? Which I think is a very fair, very valid question, because people with all sorts of belief have manipulated the story to suit their own worldviews over time. That's another thing that I've really noticed that I've been reading. But my answer is, I don't know that you always know. I think sometimes, yeah, you know for sure. You be confident that what you know is truth. But I do think that you have to have some type of value, your own like value as your internal guiding light. For me, that is love and truth. So love and truth is what I kind of measure most of my decisions by or based on, which is another reason why a lot of my religious beliefs just at the end of the day could not hold water, because it just, when put up against love and truth, it never held up, never completely held up. There was always a caveat, like love, but this is true, but yeah, that kind of thing. So I think that is the answer that I have come up with till date. But I also think a more important question that you should ask yourself is, if one day a glimmer of light, let's say you are making decisions as you go, if one day a glimmer of light punches a hole in your assumptions, right, the things that you've assumed to be true, are you at least willing to break free and go towards the light, even though it costs you your previous beliefs and your friends and your family? Or are you going to stick with familiar illusions? So yeah, I feel like I've said a lot today. I myself might benefit from re-listening to this episode over and over and over again, and I actually do feel physically better. Although I've sneezed like 3 times during the recording of this episode. Of course you won't hear it because I've cut them out, but I do feel a little bit better. So I guess what I needed was just to be a little bit active. Thank you so much for listening. Like I said, I will leave details in the description of this episode if you are interested in reading. I appreciate you so much for listening, especially if you got to this point. And I hope as you prepare for the week ahead that you, as I always say, be gentle with yourself, take it easy with yourself, and give yourself a pep talk now and then. You deserve to be gentle with yourself. If there are things that you wanted to do that you haven't done, don't feel bad. And if you do feel bad, do not feel bad about feeling bad, because that is another level that's I apparently had unlocked. But yeah, let's be kind and be a little more patient with ourselves. And if you like this episode, please leave a review on the podcast in general. I really appreciate it. That's what helps them push the podcast to possible other listeners. Like, share, if you know someone that would like it and enjoy it and find it helpful. Like, I hope you did find it helpful. Thanks. Have a great week. Bye.